Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Red Hollow, Kentucky wasn't the kind of place outsiders usually chose to settle down. That's why everyone noticed when Paul arrived in the fall of 2017. I was 28 then, running the small hardware store on Chestnut Avenue that I'd inherited from my dad. In a town where gossip traveled faster than the wind, a new face stood out like a flare in the dark. Paul wasn't like the usual drifters who passed through. He moved with a calm, deliberate rhythm, always wearing the same worn denim jacket with copper buttons that caught the light in strange ways. He rented the old Garrison building near the square, the one that had sat empty since the antique shop closed, and within a week, a neat hand-painted sign appeared on the door. Radio repair, all makes, all ages. The letters were so perfect they barely looked handmade. Now, Red Hollow still loved its radios. Even after the internet finally reached us, most families kept at least one dusty relic tucked away in the attic. Heirlooms from when people gathered around them for Roosevelt's fireside chats. Paul's timing was perfect. A wave of nostalgia had swept through the older crowd, all wanting to hear those warm, crackling sounds again. Within a month, half the town had dropped off their broken sets, and Paul never turned anyone away. He'd just nod, write your name neatly on a yellow tag, tie it to the power cord, and tell you to come back in exactly 3 days. Never 2, never 4, always 3. The first radio I brought him was my grandmother's 1952 Zenith, a beautiful mahogany thing that hadn't worked since I was a kid. Paul ran his fingers over the surface like he was reading Braille, then opened it up without even searching for screws. He handled the parts like he already knew where everything belonged. 3 days later, when I picked it up, that radio sang, clearer than it ever had, pulling in stations from Louisville, Nashville, even Chicago on quiet nights. Paul only charged me $30. When I tried to give him more, he slid the money back like it might burn his skin. By November, he was a quiet kind of celebrity. Not that he ever joined town events or spoke much. You could find him at Nora's Diner every morning at 6:15 sharp, black coffee, wheat toast, and a newspaper from some faraway city like Detroit or Seattle, always 3 weeks old. His shop lights stayed on until 2 or 3 in the morning, and if you walked past, you'd hear multiple radios playing at once, overlapping voices and static that made your teeth ache if you listened too long. The strangest part, though, was that nobody ever saw him use a radio himself. The first sign something was wrong came from Beverly Hutchinson's cream-colored Motorola, the one Paul had fixed right before Thanksgiving. She called me at the hardware store, terrified, asking me to come over and bring my grandmother's Zenith. I showed up to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the radio like it might come alive. Wait until 40:30, she said, then turn them both on. At 40:29, Hank Thompson was crooning on the country station. At exactly 40:30, the music vanished into static. Then a man's voice came through, steady, calm, describing how Beverly had burned her late husband's gambling debts in the backyard months earlier. He knew every detail: the metal trash can, her old bathrobe, the tears that blurred her vision. Then the voice shifted and started describing me. How I'd debated shaving that morning, how I'd eaten cereal from the box, how I'd called my ex just to hear her voicemail. The broadcast lasted 7 minutes, then snapped back to regular music mid-song like nothing had happened. Beverly begged me to take her radio. When I picked it up, I noticed faint scratches underneath, BH47, not her initials, more like a catalog number. By that evening, the whole town was in chaos. Dozens of people reported their repaired radios airing similar messages, deeply personal things no one else could know. George Whitman's radio exposed an old affair. The Carpenter twins' sets revealed where they'd been stealing wire. Nancy Dawson's Philco told her bridge club she'd been secretly publishing romance novels. Each broadcast lasted 7 minutes, always at different times, always uncannily accurate. That night, people gathered at my store clutching their radios like they were cursed. Some swore they could still hear whispers even with the batteries out. Sheriff Garrett, who'd kept order in Red Hollow longer than I'd been alive, thought it was a prank, until his own radio confessed he'd falsified evidence years ago to protect a relative. After that, he rallied a group to confront Paul. We reached his shop around 9:30. The door was unlocked. Inside looked normal, workbenches lined with tubes and wires. But the air was colder, heavy with a sour, metallic smell. Garrett found a hidden door behind a filing cabinet that led to a basement none of us knew existed. The town's old building plans showed no such thing. We descended into a red-lit room filled with recording gear, tape machines, microphones, and hundreds of labeled cassettes. Each bore the name of a town resident. Some were long dead, others had moved away, and a few were names no one recognized. In the center stood a massive table crowded with old and modern electronics wired together into some kind of twisted network. On one wall hung a map of Red Hollow marked with pins and photographs. People in their homes, caught through windows. Beverly burning papers. George at the motel. Nancy writing her novels, all dated years before Paul's arrival. Garrett pulled down one photo, a young woman named Catherine Brennan. On the back, in Paul's perfect handwriting, KBR's 031, disappeared April 2008, recordings complete, awaiting broadcast window. Catherine had vanished 9 years earlier. We'd all assumed she'd run away. Now it looked like she'd never left. We called for state police. While waiting, Deputy Collins found a leather journal full of Paul's notes. Pages on radio frequencies and human consciousness, on how sound waves could preserve the essence of a person. The final entry, dated that morning, read, "They know now. Time to migrate the collection to location C. Must preserve the archived voices before they understand." 2 hours later, they found Paul sitting quietly at a bus station 3 towns over, holding a suitcase filled with clothes and more cassettes. Names from other states, going back 40 years. He didn't resist arrest, just asked if we'd touched the equipment. When Garrett said yes, Paul's face went pale. He whispered, "Containment protocols are broken." The state investigators spent weeks cataloging the basement. The tapes weren't ordinary recordings. They captured hours of people's private lives, conversations in cars, secret phone calls, even what sounded like dreams. 37 of the names matched missing persons from 3 states. No bodies were found, but behind another wall lay a hidden room filled with personal items. Wallets, jewelry, IDs, all neatly labeled. Paul never admitted to killing anyone. He called himself an archivist, a keeper of stories that would otherwise be lost. But he never explained how he made the recordings, or why Catherine Brennan's purse was sitting on that shelf. They sent him to a federal psychiatric facility. Red Hollow tried to move on. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear faint broadcasts through the walls. Voices describing things that haven't happened yet. Conversations that won't take place for days. And I can't help wondering if Paul's machines are still out there somewhere, still recording, still waiting for the right frequency to tell the next secret. The drive to Gladwin wound through miles of pine forest and long forgotten highways, past rusted mailboxes and sagging barns that looked frozen in time. My 42nd birthday had just passed a month earlier, and heading back there felt like walking backward through the years, each mile peeling away a layer of distance I'd spent decades building. My family owned that house from 1989 to 1991. No one ever told me why we left so suddenly, why Dad took a pay cut to move us to Ohio, or why Mom would shut down whenever I brought up the old place. Then, 3 weeks ago, the realtor called. The current owners had walked away, stopped paying taxes, and the house was now in foreclosure. My name was still on some old county paperwork, so they asked if I wanted the first option to buy. I didn't. But something about it, some unfinished thread, pulled me back. The property looked smaller than I remembered, sitting on the wrong side of the railroad tracks that divided Gladwin in two. Nice. And forgotten. The paint peeled in long curls like dead skin, and the front porch sagged under the weight of Michigan winters. I parked my rental car beside a pile of rotting lumber that had probably been there for decades. The key was hidden under a fake rock near the steps, just like the realtor said. Holding that cold metal key, I thought of my younger sister, Melody, How she used to cling to my arm when we climbed those same steps after school. She was 7 back then and terrified of the thin man. Said he stood in the corner of our shared bedroom at night, watching us. Mom always told her it was just shadows from the streetlight, but Melody never believed it. Inside, the house breathed out 30 years of dust and mildew. That sour, heavy smell of abandonment filled my lungs. Wallpaper curled off the walls, water stains spreading across the ceiling like bruises. My footsteps echoed through the living room, the same space where Mom used to cover every chair in plastic and Dad pretended not to hear Melody crying upstairs. The kitchen was stripped bare, missing cabinet doors, appliances gone, holes left behind like pulled teeth. But it was the hallway that made me stop. The air felt thicker there. The closet door at the end of the hall stood slightly open. The same closet Melody always refused to go near. Our old bedroom door groaned as I pushed it open. Afternoon light filtered through grime, covered windows, stretching long shadows across the floor. I could almost see how a frightened child might imagine monsters here. But then I noticed something else. Deep scratch marks carved into the closet frame, jagged and desperate. I ran my fingers over them, wondering how long they'd been there. The closet was empty except for a few wire hangers that clinked softly as I opened it wider. The back wall looked different, newer, as if someone had patched it up. I pressed against it, and the drywall crumbled away under my car key, revealing a narrow crawl space that didn't match the house's layout. The smell hit first. Stale air, mixed with something organic and wrong. I shone my phone's flashlight inside. The space went back 4 feet, barely enough room for a person to crawl. Boxes and plastic-wrapped bundles filled the back, coated in decades of dust. I reached in and dragged one out, catching my shirt on a nail. Inside were photographs from the 1960s, smiling families at barbecues, birthdays, holidays. At the bottom was a cracked driver's license, Gregory Fulton, 1968. The face staring back had hollow eyes and sharp cheekbones that seemed to follow me. More boxes, more of the Fultons' lives. Carolyn Fulton's nursing diploma, their wedding album, tax returns, even Gregory's wristwatch still faintly ticking. These weren't things people just left behind. Then I found the last box, and my stomach turned. Inside was a child's yellow dress, folded neatly around a pair of tiny white shoes. Beneath it were newspaper clippings about the Fultons' disappearance in 1969. They'd vanished one October night, dinner still on the table, the car in the driveway, doors unlocked. The search lasted weeks. Theories ranged from mob ties to mental breakdowns, but nothing was ever proven. One follow-up article mentioned later owners reporting strange happenings, doors opening, shadows in hallways, the feeling of being watched. As I sat there surrounded by the Fultons' forgotten lives, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Then a knock. It was the sheriff, an older man in his 60s with wary eyes. He said he'd heard about someone poking around the property. When I explained who I was and showed him what I'd found, his face shifted from suspicion to something like quiet dread. He followed me inside, examined the crawl space and the boxes. "We knew they never left town," he said, studying Gregory's license under his flashlight. "But we never found bodies, never found a trace of what happened that night." He took photos, made notes, then pulled out more clippings from the last box, older ones from the 1950s. 6 missing persons cases, all from homes near the railroad tracks. He read them silently, his jaw tight. When we finished, he sat on the porch steps and lit a cigarette, even though it was obvious he'd been trying to quit. "Every owner after the Fultons left within a year," he said. "Your family stayed the longest, 2 years. The rest didn't last more than 8 months. They'd give excuses, money, jobs, but if you pressed them, they all mentioned the same thing: feeling watched, feeling like someone else was always there." I told him about Melody's thin man. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me for a long moment. "Your sister wasn't the only one," he finally said. "Kids from 3 other families saw the same thing. A tall, thin figure standing in corners, mostly at night. One boy used to draw him over and over until his parents burned the sketches." None of those families ever met, but every description matched. Too tall for the ceiling. Too thin, like he'd never eaten. Always just standing there, watching. He crushed the cigarette under his boot. We checked for gas leaks, mold, anything that could cause hallucinations. Even brought in a psychologist. Nothing. No reason those kids should have seen the same thing. As he walked to his car, he stopped and turned back. "One more thing," he said quietly. "About 10 years ago, a homeless vet broke into this place for shelter. We found him the next morning walking barefoot down Highway 61 in the snow, bleeding from the feet. He kept saying there was someone already living in the walls. Said, he's too tall for the rooms, too tall for the doors, but he fits in the spaces between." After the sheriff left, the sun dipped low, turning the ruined house gold for a moment. I thought about calling Melody, asking what she remembered, but I knew she wouldn't talk. She'd spent years in therapy for what Mom called night terrors. As I gathered the Fultons, things to bring to the sheriff's office, I noticed something in their wedding album. A tall figure standing behind the guests, warped and stretched like a flaw in the film. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but the more I flipped through the photos, the more he appeared. Always at the edges. Always too tall. I left everything for the sheriff and drove straight back to Ohio without stopping. 2 weeks later he called to say they'd torn the house down. Nothing strange found, no bodies, no evidence, just empty walls. Though the demolition crew swore the layout was wrong, rooms that didn't match the blueprints, spaces between walls that shouldn't exist, they filled it all with concrete and built a park over it. Sometimes, when I drive past Gladwin, I think about stopping, but I never do. Melody and I don't talk about it, but last Christmas, after too much wine, she whispered, "He was too tall for the room, wasn't he?" That we changed the subject right away. But I could tell she still dreams about him. The figure in the corners. The one that doesn't belong in any room, but somehow always fits perfectly in the spaces we don't see. I'm 26 now, not exactly young anymore, but even as I sit here typing this, my hands still get sweaty thinking about what happened when my best friend Jason and I were 15. We grew up in a forgettable little town in Iowa, the kind of place where the biggest news was a lost dog or the high school football team losing again. My parents ran a hardware store downtown, and Jason's dad worked at the grain elevator near the railroad tracks. It was the summer of 2012, and we spent most nights playing video games in my basement or hanging out at the gas station parking lot with other bored kids. Life in a small town can make you do dumb things just to feel alive, which is probably why we decided to sneak out that Thursday night in early August. Jason had been texting me all evening about how his older brother said kids went to the park behind Miller Street to smoke and drink without getting caught. We didn't smoke or drink, but the idea of being out past midnight felt rebellious enough for two good kids like us. The park wasn't anything special. A cracked basketball court with bent rims, rusty swings, a slide with layers of old paint peeling off, and a small concrete restroom that always smelled like mold and piss. Around 12:30, we climbed out my bedroom window using the oak tree outside, a trick I'd picked up from movies. The walk took maybe 20 minutes through quiet streets and dark houses where everyone normal was asleep. When we got there, the first thing we saw was an old sedan parked near the basketball court. Maybe dark blue or black, hard to tell under the streetlight. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. Even at 15, we knew that was weird. We could barely make out someone sitting in the driver's seat. A shadow, definitely a man by his build. Jason whispered that we should just leave, but I wanted to act tough, so I yelled, "Hey, everything okay over there?" The reaction was instant. The engine roared, tires screeched, and the car peeled out so fast it nearly hit the fence post at the exit. We just stood there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of it. Once the adrenaline faded, we started laughing, joking that we'd interrupted a drug deal or caught someone cheating. We wandered over to where the car had been parked, and Jason found a still, smoking menthol cigarette butt on the ground. The smart move would have been to go home, but we were 15 and thought nothing could touch us, so we stayed, sitting on the swings, chains creaking in the dark. About 10 minutes later, while Jason was talking about some girl from biology class, I noticed movement near the restroom building about 30 feet away. The men's room door was open just a crack, maybe 6 inches, and someone was standing behind it, watching us. At first, I thought it was another teenager. Then I saw the mask, one of those cheap plastic ones from the county fair, supposed to look like a wolf or dog. Fake fur glued around the edges and peeling off. Whoever it was stood perfectly still. I could see their eyes through the holes, reflecting the streetlight. Jason noticed too and went dead quiet, his whole body stiff. We just sat there, staring at this unmoving figure. Maybe 30 seconds passed, it felt like forever. Finally, Jason stood up and pulled out his phone flashlight. The moment the light hit the door, the figure ducked back and the door slammed shut. No running, no sounds, just silence. We whispered back and forth, Jason wanting to run, me saying maybe someone needed help. Eventually, we decided to walk past the restroom on our way out, staying a good distance away. As we got closer, maybe 15 feet from the door, we heard it, breathing. Slow, deliberate, deep breaths. Not like someone tired, but like someone wanting us to hear them. Jason started recording on his phone, his hand shaking, and we walked past without stopping. The second we cleared the restroom, the door creaked open behind us. We didn't look back, we just ran. Jumping fences, cutting through yards, setting off motion sensor lights, until we collapsed inside my room, locking the door and barricading it with a chair. Around 5 a.m., when the sky started to brighten, Jason showed me the video. Most of it was black and shaky, but one frame showed the mask clearly, and behind it, the person was wearing light blue medical scrubs. There was something dark stained across the front, maybe dirt, maybe blood. We thought about calling the cops, but figured they'd never believe 2 kids sneaking out. So we stayed quiet. That morning, while my mom was making breakfast, she called me downstairs, worried. On TV, the local news showed that same park, now surrounded by yellow tape. The reporter said police had found suspicious items near the restroom. But what caught my eye was the basketball court, still showing the tire marks from that car peeling out. Then my phone started buzzing, Jason texting me nonstop. His brother had driven by and seen police pulling evidence from the restroom: duct tape, zip ties, and a cell phone tossed behind the toilet. Later that day, Jason's brother, who knew a guy at the police station, told us something the news didn't mention. The cops had pulled security footage from the gas station across the street and nearby ATMs. The video showed 2 teenage boys, us, entering the park around 12:53 a.m. But that wasn't the worst part. The same footage showed the sedan following us, headlights off, starting from my street. The driver had watched us climb out my window and followed us the whole way. And the masked person, they'd been waiting in that restroom since 11:30 p.m., almost an hour before we even left my house. They'd arrived in a white pickup truck with the license plate covered in mud and carried a backpack they never brought back out. When police later searched, they found that backpack hidden in the restroom ceiling tiles. Inside were zip ties, a knife, a bottle of chloroform that tested positive for fingerprints from 3 different missing person cases, and a notebook with our names and addresses circled. The masked person and the sedan driver were working together, texting each other while we were there. Both vehicles were stolen. DNA didn't match anyone in the system. No arrests. After that, police warned parents to keep kids inside after dark. We later found out there had been similar incidents in other towns that summer. 2 young people out late, strange vehicles nearby, someone in a mask. In one case, a girl was taken but managed to escape hours later. After our night, everything stopped. No more sightings. No more reports. Like whoever they were just vanished. Now, more than a decade later, I still triple check my locks. I don't go near parks at night. And if I see those cheap masks in stores, I leave immediately. Jason moved away for college and never came back. We don't talk about that night, but I know he remembers, especially when the news shows another story about someone who didn't get as lucky as we did.